Hi, and welcome to Dark Window. I'm your host, Jim Mann. Here on this program, I will be talking with many of the leading investigators, researchers, and authors on the topics of UFOs, UAPs, alien abductions, extraterrestrials, and a host of many other fascinating and related topics. So please join me and my guest for the next hour as we reach out. This is Dark Window on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. And hello, everyone. I'm Jim Mann, your host. I have a great guest with me tonight, Jennifer Stein. You're going to love this. Jennifer Stein, yes, she is the founder of Line MUFON in Pennsylvania. Jennifer also serves as state section director for the Mutual UFO in PA and director of Sedona MUFON here in Arizona. Her role for MUFON has been focused on community outreach and education. She wrote the business plan and helped establish MUFON TV in 2013 with founder Ron James. Jennifer is an artist. She's an entrepreneur. She's an award-winning documentary filmmaker. She has been keenly involved and interested in ancient history and civilizations, researching and traveling to many sites, ancient sites, for the past 18 years. Now, Jennifer earned her Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Arizona. Yay. She's self-taught. She's a self-taught filmmaker who never attended film school. But, however, her work is absolutely celebrated, if not acclaimed, within the UFO research community. And all I can say is welcome, Jennifer Stein. How are you doing tonight?
Thank you. What a lovely introduction, Jim. It's so nice to be on your show. And I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing. And I'm in your neighborhood now.
Yes, you are. You live right here in Arizona. Right. And, you know, I never knew that you were a graduate from ASU.
Wow. It's actually Tucson.
From down in Tucson. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to get this wrong because I've got a daughter that attended ASU. And if I get it wrong, I'll hear about it.
Yeah, they call the University of Arizona the U of A.
The U of A, yes. Yeah, so anyway, now Jennifer, you have been involved in a lot of projects. You have enabled so many projects. One of the things is the energy that you bring to the UFO community. You are.
Sometimes it gets me in trouble.
A lot of people ask me about Jennifer Stein, and Jennifer you're known for the Travis movie.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and most well known for that.
Yes.
But I've done film works with many people like Kathleen Martin and Zachariah Sitchin and several projects with Ron James. And, you know, it goes on and on.
It goes on and on. It does. There's so many directions you can go here, you know. And anyway, the new Jennifer Stein, who lives in Arizona, you're talking about Gobeckli Tepe.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about that, Jennifer, about where you're going with that, and how did you get involved with that end of this whole UFO
phenomenon?
Ancient, you know. Yep. How did you get going that direction?
Well, you know, I stepped into MUFON in 2000 because right. I met Ruben Uriarte, who's the state director of California. And I told him, Ruben, you know, I want to go to a UFO group. I want to join one in Pennsylvania. And he said, well, Jen, it's not functioning right now. You have to start it. And I went, I don't want to start it. I just want to go to one. But it ended up that, yes, in fact, Tom Carey, who is an author with Don Schmidt, they'd written many books on Roswell. He was the functioning director at that point or the only state section director doing anything. And he just kind of like put the whole ballywhack in my lap and said, here's our email list, start doing programs. You can do it and you'll be great. So I started doing programs. And of course, I've been reading and studying about ancient sites for a long time. I always took an interest in things like Stonehenge and, you know, ancient stone circles and around the world. And I'd studied the work of Zachariah Sitchin as well, because that's kind of UFO and ancient sites together. And one thing led to another. And I ended up going to a conference on ancient procession, well, actually on procession and ancient culture, run by a man named Walter Crintadan, and it was called the CPEC conference. And while I was there, Robert Schoch was presenting on Gobekli Tepe, and he was announcing that he was taking his very first trip of researchers in 2012. And I immediately wrote a note, ripped it out of my notebook, slipped it to his wife, who was sitting about 4 seats down from me. And I said, I'm going on that trip, and I'm going to bring probably about 15, 16 people with me. And I did. I brought 16 researchers with me, one of which was Linda Howe. Everybody wanted to go travel with Robert, and it was a closed trip. I mean, what was limited to the number of people that could go. It was one of the first ones he ran. We had, basic, geologists and other people interested in archaeology, but it was a fabulous introduction to we were planning to meet Klaus Schmidt, who was the German archaeologist who had really done all the key research on Göbekli. Unfortunately, the Turkish government pulled him away at the week that we were there, but it was a fabulous trip through Turkey, and I'm so glad I did it. It was in 2012. And I've continued to speak on the site and what it's like, and why it's an important part of human history, and why it's important for Robert Schoch as well, because Robert is best known for dating the Sphinx to probably being much older than we thought.
Exactly, yes.
And at the time, he was attacked by the Geological Association of America, saying, no, that can't be true. First, they accepted his work and said, yes, there's water erosion clearly evident on the containment wall around the Sphinx and the Sphinx itself. Obviously, the head is a different size and shape than the rest of the body. We can see it's eroded. That makes sense. And then the Egyptian Egyptologists were going to totally discredit him and the American Geological Society. They were going to start to demand back artifacts from museums all around the world. And it became this big international kerfuffle. And people criticized Robert and said, if it's really 20 or 30,000 years old, the Sphinx, where's the pottery shards? Where's the evidence of ancient society? There were only hunter-gatherers, 20,000 years ago. It couldn't possibly be that old. And then bingo, Gobekli Tepe gets really started. The research and the uncovering of Gobekli started in 95 when all this was happening for Robert. So for Robert Schoch, Gobekli Tepe is a sign that civilization did begin in the earlier time, and it was sophisticated and advanced. And that's what I speak about when I speak, and I'm going to be speaking for Phoenix MUFON on February 11th. Stacy Wrights asked me to do a presentation, and I've said, of course, Stacy, with great honor. It would be a great pleasure and a great honor. So I'm going to try to give you a little preview of my talk.
Please do. Yes, please do.
And feel free to interrupt me too if you'd like.
As far as Robert Schoch is how you say that. I am not an archaeologist. I'm not an anthropologist. I don't do any of this kind of work. But what he brings forward in the scientific world, I think makes more sense than anything that I have heard. The fact that the Sphinx is so much older than what we had originally thought, and the erosion on the Sphinx being a water erosion and not wind.
And there's two different types of water. There's water erosion and wind erosion, and they're very different. And he goes into explaining that. And as soon as you understand that, as a geologist, basically, you get it right away. And you understand, oh my gosh, no one's ever really thought about that. And it's not water erosion from flooding. A lot of people said, oh, well, the Nile floods, it's flooding. No. Rain is top down. Flooding is side to side, just like, wind erosion. So,
well, that's great. Well, okay. So show us what you got, Jennifer.
I would love to. I'm going to pop in some slides, which
please do. Yes.
Are, good visuals for people to be able to appreciate what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And just to give them a basic, inside, perspective. So where Gobekli Tepe sits, in the upper corner here, you can see the red diagram. That's the whole map of Turkey. And then the little square box is what we're looking at as a blow up. So Göbekli, you can see, is listed here. And it's only about 16 miles from the Syrian border. You can also see the town of Urfa, which is right nearby. And on either side of the word Gobekli, you can see rivers and water coming in. So it's right between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. So it's right at the heart of civilization, what we call the Fertile Crescent. It's basically right there. Interestingly, also, it's right near the town of Haran. This is a picture taken from the 1960s of the famous city of Haran, which is where Abraham grew up. The famous story that took place where Abraham smashes his father's, idols. So Abraham's lineage goes back to the roots of Christianity, for Christians, and Judaism, and the Muslim culture for Arabs. So it's a very important, part of human history. And certainly religious history. When you get to the site, of course, I was there in 2012, and it's much changed now, but it gives you a picture of the province right when you walk in, and this whole description in multiple languages. So here's a little blow up of that little province. You see all those blue areas in the top of this map. That's called the Ataturk Dam, named after the president of Turkey. Mr. Ataturk. And Sanliurfa, which you can clearly see there, is the nearest town to Gobekli Tepe. So the site was actually, this is an aerial picture taken from a magazine. That's why it's got a line through the middle. It's actually a grape, a grape yard, or where grapevines are grown for wine. And the man who owns it was growing wine and kept running into stones. So eventually, when it became known that it wasn't a suspected and important archaeological site, then the archaeological dig began, which you can see here from the air. This is another picture of it. Basically, it's the same picture, just in slightly different color variation. So this is the guy who owns the property. He's the vineyard maker. And we did a special prayer there early in the morning. One morning we went to the site at sunrise.
Okay.
It was really nice to meet him. He spoke English. He walked around constantly with a book showing you all the pictures of all the different film crews that had been there. This is just a picture of me in front of the archaeological site. When I was there, there was just this wooden walkway around the site. Here's another quick picture of me in the site. This is like another one. This is taken at sunrise when we went there for that sunrise morning. And here is a picture of Robert and Katie right by the site as well. So it's much changed now. There used to be just this wooden walkway when we were there that you could walk around. And just another quick picture of Katie and Robert. It was wonderful to travel with him. He gives presentations every night before you go out and see a site the next day. It's really special. So here's another magazine shot of Gobeckli. This is from, I think, either National Geographic, I think, and it kind of shows you the site sort of still buried. So what Gobeckli is a series of T-shaped stones that are relatively thin, and they're all one piece, and they have intricate carvings on them. You can see some of this in this picture. Here's another picture of the site being uncovered. This is an enclosure known as Enclosure D. So it's a circle of standing stones with two taller standing stones in the middle, which have carvings and etchings on them. And what's very interesting about Gobeckli Tepe is whoever built this site, they deliberately buried it. And you can begin to see the foundations of the deliberate burying that took place. You can see the layers of stone as they're being uncovered. Like the sandbags, you can see this guy in a blue shirt standing on top of some sandbags there. Those sandbags were put in place to hold the dirt in place, but it was small, fist-sized stones with layers of dirt and mud laid in around it so that these stones and pillars would be protected. Now, interestingly, this is a magazine picture of the central pillars in Enclosure D, which is believed to be one of the oldest enclosures that's been uncovered so far. It goes back to around 12,000 BC. And the way this is dated is that those materials, as I showed you before, that were packed in around these stones, in some of those buried materials were some organic materials, meaning leather or food stuff or grain or something that had an organic nature that could be carbon dated. And with carbon dating, you can get pretty close, pretty damn close to within, I think it's 56,000 years, before the present time. So we can get a pretty good idea of when the site was buried. That's very important to remember. You cannot date stone. There's nothing about it that decomposes, right? With carbon-14 dating, you just can't date stone. So the site could have been built much before this time and then just buried 12,000 years ago. And that's also a very important site, or important point to remember about the site. Now, what's interesting is look at the articulation on this standing T stone. Just to point out what we're looking at here, there's a platform on the bottom with these little tiny, I call them dodo birds. We don't know if they're dodo birds or not, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 1, 2, 3, 5 little birds across this base platform that this T is wedged into. And the front edge of the T seems to have a loincloth and a belt. And then this very refined edge up the front. And then this little kind of, it looks like a bull's head at the top, what we might call the nape of a neck, if this is an anthropomorphic structure, which Klaus Schmidt, the German archaeologist who did all the research there, he believes these are anthropomorphic standing T-shaped stones that appear to be like beings that might be like spiritual beings of some sort, not fully articulated like people. Next picture here is a close-up of this belt that exists and these arms that come down the side and fingers that wrap around the front. There's also some sort of center to the belt that looks like an H of some sort. I don't know if you can see my mouse going over that H. It's fascinating. Here's another picture that I took. There are poles now in place to hold up this standing T, but it's intricately carved on the side. Here's another picture from a magazine, because if these are not well lit, you can't really appreciate the articulation on these stones. So this is a picture taken at night, right after these central pillars in D were uncovered. And maybe you can obviously see the fingers wrapping around the front of this pillar, but up the side of the pillar, you can see the arm that's attached to these fingers that goes all the way up the side of this pillar and bends. Here's another great close-up picture of the fingers. Here's another articulation from a magazine where you can see the arms going up, bending, and then going back up to the top of this T pillar. And you can also see the nape of the neck very clearly. And you can see a pillar behind the central pillar, which is also intricately carved. So the archaeologists understand that no one would have gone to the effort to carve these stones the way they're carved, only to have them completely concealed behind stone walls. So these were originally completely freestanding stones, like a circle of stones, much like we might think of possibly a Stonehenge structure. Here's another one of my pictures where you can see the belt and the arm and the loincloth. And the stones were also embedded in some form of early concrete into these base platforms. They were made out of limestone. They were carved nearby this hill and site. The whole hill that these are on, which I was showing you the aerial pictures of, it's a limestone U-shaped large area hill. And it sits about 2,000 feet above sea level and about 1,500 feet above the valley floor below it. So when you're on that plateau at night, there's only the plateau, these stones, and the night sky right above you. So that's pretty profound, because whoever built these had to be, Robert Schoch believes these were aligned with astronomical alignments, and maybe the carvings on the stones relate to that. Many people look at these arms and these fingers and they say, wow, it looks just like the arms on the Moai.
Easter Island,
right?
Yes.
Long arms come down, fingers wrap around the front. There's belts there. Yes, there are statues all over Peru and China and parts of Indonesia that have, these arms and hands, with the hands in a meditative state right under the belly. There very well could be an overlap. In fact, right near this site, this guy was discovered. He sits in the Urfa Museum, and he's called Urfa Man. He was found by a road crew not far from Gobekli Tepe. And he seems to be a man with a very interesting outfit on. Look at that dynamic V-shaped costume he's wearing, right?
Right. Yeah.
I look at him and go, oh, it's Star Trek, right?
I
He
was
looks
about to
like
say
somebody
that.
from Star Trek, right? And it appears that he's actually holding his phallus. It's not quite obvious here looking in this picture. Here's another picture from him front on, but you can almost see what looks like possibly testicles and, a phallus figure that he's holding on to. So is this significant? We don't really know. This is Katie taking a picture of Robert in front of him. It's quite fascinating.
Jennifer,
Yeah.
does anyone know how old that statue is?
No. Because of, again, you can't date stone.
You can't date the stone, yes.
But they believe that it is contemporary or contemporaneous with the discovery of Gobekli, and that, many of these things probably date back to around the 8, 9, 10, 12,000 year period. So, it's quite significant. Just to give you a sense of some of the elaborate carvings that are on some of these T-shaped stones, just chew on this for a minute, right? This is a form of some type of small lion or small fox of some sort. It's a prehistoric animal they do not believe is still alive anymore. This is on the front of a T-shaped pillar. As it's being uncovered, you can still see the ground is right below this. And this is a picture from a magazine as well. Because when I was there, it was covered over in a box because they were trying to protect it. But a relief sculpture like this has to be formed as the whole stone is being formed. It's not like a separate sculpture that's then attached to the front. No, it's carved in relief. So the whole thing is designed and thought about and chipped away at gradually. Now, limestone's relatively easy to form. It's not like a hard stone like balsat or something, but still, look at the elaborate artwork here. You obviously wouldn't just create that to have it buried or have it hidden behind some sort of stone wall.
Is there anyone putting any theories out as to why Gobekli Tepe was buried to begin with? Are there any theories?
Yes.
Hypotheses?
Yes. Basically, they are thinking that, and can I remove the picture for a minute? How do I undo it?
Yes. Click on it again.
Just click on it again and it disappears? Okay. There we go. Perfect. So Robert and a number of people believe and think that potentially this particular time date is between what's called it's right around the Younger Dryas. So there was a period of time about 11 to 10,000 years ago where there was a rapid warming, then a cooling again, then an eventual warming to where we are now. And there was major cataclysms taking place on the surface of the earth at that time. Massive floods, earthquakes, things like this, massive freezings, animal migrations, all sorts of things taking place. Food shortages, whatnot, going on for living populations. And it is thought that these were most likely repaired, because some of them you'll see in my presentation, they're cracked and broken. So they were rapidly repaired, put back in place the way they were, then encased in walls to hold them in place and buried over, most likely to protect it and to protect it for the future. Whether they were going to be uncovered and used again in the future, who knows?
All right.
Who knows?
Okay. So the whole site is pre-flood.
Well,
that's
interesting. It's interesting. It's, I believe part of the site probably is pre-flood, then goes through flood, then goes to post-flood, because the different circles that have been uncovered have been dated at different thousands of years periods of time. So they've been built in different periods of time. And it goes back to 12,000 years and up to about 7,000.
Now, Jennifer, how big is this site? I mean, is that just what we see in that picture? Is it just that, or is there more to it?
There is more to it, okay? So remember I was showing you sort of this picture of the hill. I'll go back and show you that.
Okay.
Right? That's kind of like the vineyard, right? You can see the little area that has been so far uncovered, right? only 6 circles of a total of, I think, 20 are lying in the ground. So 6 have been uncovered, 14 more have been determined that lie still underneath the ground uncovered. So the site is massive.
So
It's massive.
do they have plans to excavate the entire hill?
I don't think there's current funding in Turkey to make that happen. And from what I understand, this is now roofed over and it's just become an archaeological visiting tourist site. I don't think ongoing excavations are still happening, but honestly, I am not sure of that. I haven't been back to Turkey myself. So, but it's really, really quite fascinating. I hope that they do, because when we excavate things like this, we learn things about our past and we begin to put missing pieces of the puzzle together. And many people believe this is what we have to do. There's a wonderful new program now on, I think with the Travel Channel or the History Channel. It's called Apocalypse something by Graham Hancock.
Okay.
And he's going into the fact that we have missing parts of our history that we do not understand. There's lots of ancient sites that go back, at least to the 10,000 year period, probably before. And we have to begin to understand that human history may be closer to 100, 200, maybe even 300,000 years old, as it states it is in a lot of the Sumerian texts, right?
Right.
So until we begin to really be willing to look at pieces of the puzzle picture, even biblical history talks about much earlier times. They talk about the days of old, and the men of old. And they talk about the Nephilim and the Anunnaki, right, who came here from someplace else. They say, we don't know what that is. They came here from above. Well, what does that mean? So there are, many people can look at Genesis, the whole biblical story of Genesis, as a beginning of the exploration and human development on this planet. And really, it may be sharing pieces of history that possibly came here from another planet by beings that came here. Maybe they were much like us, but with the cataclysms and the wars and the burying. I mean, each time there is a war, the history of that war is written by the victor. So a lot of times the history of the previous culture who was here is lost.
Now, is there anyone in the archaeological community that is debating the age of Göbekli Tepe?
Well, they wouldn't dare go after Klaus Schmidt and the German archaeological system.
Yeah.
American archaeologists have been rather arrogant, and they've gone after, say, South American and Chinese archaeologists when they come up with dates that are 20, 30, and 40,000 years old, and they say, oh, your equipment is wrong, or your process is wrong, or can't possibly be that old. And we had a tendency to do that around the world prior to Klaus Schmidt putting his stamp of approval on this dating.
Right.
And it was dated multiple times in multiple university settings in order to verify the dates, because it was so groundbreaking. And the other thing that really brought Gobeckli Tepe to the forefront is the thinking around the beginning of civilization. This period of time is considered to be Neolithic. That means that it's pre-writing, pre-pottery, pre-agriculture, pre-domestication of animals, pre-organized civilized societies.
Hunter-gatherer.
Right. We were hunter-gatherers, right? We lived in bands and in caves and, So the idea now is being floated by many archaeologists, including Klaus Schmidt, and he's the one who started this. He said, maybe the civilizing concept behind humanity civilizing was the idea that we needed to build temples or build structures like this, build monuments possibly to the stars, build, monuments that aligned with astrological movements. And actually, Robert Schoch has taken this theory and then just added to it very nicely, which is what I love about real scientists doing real scientific work. Klaus figured out that probably circle D aligned with, what's known as the belt of Orion or the Orion constellations, and also Taurus. They're all kind of in the night sky in the same place, and the two central T's seem to face Orion. But then as you go later in time, the other circles which have been uncovered seem to reorient due to precession the two central T pillars so that they realign to Orion and Taurus, right?
Right.
Or
Yeah.
Orion and Taurus. So there seems to be possibly the reason why maybe they buried these is they had to realign due to precession every 1,000 years.
Exactly.
Because they were no longer.
Was that you were talking, or you were mentioning the series that Graham Hancock did?
Yes.
Was that Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix?
Yes, Ancient Apocalypse. That's it. I remember the name Apocalypse, but I couldn't remember the word ancient. Yes, it's an excellent series. And he visits many sites, including Gobeckli. And, I think it's an excellent series. The only thing I would say is that Graham doesn't really credit the people that he also borrows research from. And he stands on the shoulders of many archaeologists and researchers who have brought these sites to the public and done 30, 40, 50 years of research in their own locales. And then Graham will come in and just, interview them and then interpret his own interpretation of what he thinks the site could possibly mean. But it's still a very good series.
Yeah.
But Graham's not the only person asking deep questions. I mean, my gosh, there's, Robert Bouval and Robert Schoch and Zachariah Sitchin and, the list goes on and on and on. The author of Chariots of the Gods, right?
Right.
Blanking on his name at the moment.
These are uncomfortable questions for the established archaeological community.
Yes,
That we need to rewrite the history of us.
Yes. Yes.
We've only got part of the story here.
So
what else do you have here? Now, I see you've got a lot of pictures.
I do have a couple more pictures. I'll run through some of these. This is a magazine shot. Of course, it's in Turkish, but it's showing you the central circle of D that's still half uncovered. But look at the top pictures here. Look at some of the carvings that are actually on some of these T-shaped stones. They're absolutely amazing how elaborately they're articulated. Here's a close-up of one of my shots of a group of dodo birds, I guess, on the top. There's also some key cuts on the top of some of these T stones. Not all of them have key cuts, but we see these key cuts all the time, right? In other places, like in South America. Also on the base platform, there looks like what looks like you would use maybe a pestulum in to grind some herbs or something like that. Here's another picture of like what looks like a hyena to me, living in the Southwest. Maybe it's something else, a round hole carved in the side. Here's another picture of that same image. Just the base platform with all these little birds on it.
Dodo birds.
The dodo birds. Here's one of my pictures. This is what the site looked like while we were there. It was still in the process of being uncovered. And actually not all of it has been yet, but you can see how deliberately these stone walls were put in place. You can tell these were put in place by hand, by people burying them by hand. And you can see some of the boxes put in place to cover and protect some of these because they were totally exposed to the sun and the elements. Here's another central T shape and circular enclosure. This is circle C. You can see in the background of the central pillar, one that's stuck in a wall and it's not even fully uncovered yet. You can see how they built the stone walls to kind of upright and hold these things in place. Here's another central T pillar that's different. See how much thicker it is? It's wider at the base. This is another big debate, was it easier to put, circle stones like this in place later? Why was it so wide as compared to the ones that are older? Did they get smarter?
Jennifer, these animals that we see carved into these stones.
That's like a fox.
Have we positively identified these, or are these sort of exotic animals that we cannot identify?
Some of them are definitely related to animals we have today. And this one is considered to be a fox, and
Okay.
he's been clearly identified. In fact, when I've given this talk a couple times, and I gave it in Lachlan, Nevada, and there was a zoologist that came up and said, "Oh, I could tell you all the species and what they're related to." And I said, "Great, you should actually write that down and send that information to Robert Schoch. He might be very interested in it." So
Absolutely.
when I present, I do comparisons to Stonehenge, because Stonehenge is one of the most well-known standing stone circles that we know about, but of course they're all over the world. But what's similar to Stonehenge and Göbekli Tepe is that in Stonehenge it had inner stones in an inner circle that were higher or taller, and Göbekli is much like that. There are two central T's that stand taller, about 16 feet tall in comparison to the 10 to 12 foot tall other T stones around the outside edge. But of course, at Stonehenge, these were all separate pieces that were linked together by top or capstones. That's not the case in Göbekli. At Göbekli, you had separate standing T stones, as you can see here, that were all one piece. They weren't linked together. So there is some differences. And many people, this is a graphic image that shows you of the stones that are uncovered, you can see, but then you can see the other circles in the back that kind of curve around this U-shaped crescent hill. These have yet to be uncovered, and we found them with ground penetrating radar that reflects back the stone. So I'm not going to go on too much longer, but I'm going to share with you some of the other really unusual figurines that have been dug up at Göbekli Tepe. And this came out of one of the other circles, and it is a very weird looking podium. And this is a composite picture I've put together for you with three sides of the same, say, standing image.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
So
Yes.
the first one in the middle is what you see when you look straight onto this image. And then if you look to the right, you're seeing the right side. And if you look to the left, you're seeing the left side. And it almost looks as if this is possibly a woman, standing with her knees bent or squatting, possibly giving birth to a smaller being coming out between her legs.
I was about to say that. That's kind of,
Weird.
yes.
It's weird. Her face is missing. Her head is kind of missing. But you see from the side her arms kind of coming down, and she's kind of like maybe holding her own, what might be her own breast or her own chest of some sort. But then you see other hands that seem to be coming down even lower, which don't really make sense. Is that someone else holding on to her? Then it looks like her knees are bent, but her legs almost look kind of animalistic, like her hips are showing, and then her hips kind of go back, and her legs are kind of long. They look like animal legs. Is this an alien being giving birth? I mean, lots of people have had a field day on this sculpture.
Right.
Nobody really knows what it is. Here's a picture of it standing in the UFO Museum, and that's Linda Howe sitting on the edge of this little platform, and Robert Schoch's wife, Katie Schoch, taking pictures of some of the other sculptures that are found here in this site. Let's see what some of my other pictures are. This is just some other pictures of the T-shaped stones. We saw an opposite side of this column before that again looks like a fox, and you can see how thick and how this is all one solid piece of stone. There's not a capstone on this, but it's made to look like there's a separate stone by the way it's articulately carved, by taking the lower column and indenting it in, so there's a shadow line coming down, right?
Right.
So whoever's carved these things thought long and hard about doing it. This is not what you would consider a typical, hunter-gatherer society. Some other pictures lit at night from National Geographic. Here's another picture of that fox we saw on the front, well lit at night. This is another base of a T-shape base structure that holds a T standing stone in it. And the base of it looked like they were doing some kind of ritual in it. It looks like there are snakes coming up to possibly sniff or feed from some sort of trough that's put in there at the base of it. Was that for the burning of incense or the prepping of some kind of ayahuasca ceremony or something. We have no idea. But somebody did a lot of articulation to carve. And are those lizards or are they snakes? We don't know.
Well, let me say, this says a 16 or 11,600-year-old temple. Now, here's a question I have. Okay. Every time one of these Neolithic or these old, huge, megalithic spots are uncovered, every time these things are uncovered and these huge stones or these buildings, we always say they're a temple. If I
didn't use the word temple.
If I didn't know better, I would say the only thing people built 11 and 12,000 years ago were temples and churches. Didn't they build any other structures that were used for other purposes? Marketplace or gathering. It's always a temple.
Well, there's an area not far from Gobekli Tepe known as Catahoulioque. And at Catahoulioque, they have found underground structures or structures that were literally dug underground where people lived. And why were they living underground? Also in Cappadocia, not too far away, less than 100 miles away from Gobekli Tepe, there are additionally, limestone pillars that people carved in and lived within. So this is quite interesting because Robert Schoch has a theory that there was a period of time in our history where it was not safe to live on the surface due to massive coronal outbursts that went sort of in waves. It would be intense for periods of time, then it would die back and people could come out, or people could come out at night, right? But then during the day, it was way too hot, or the waves were much too intense. People couldn't survive the radiation unless they were protected. And the only way to be protected was to be underground. So Catahoulioque is a clear example of that, where there was definitely massive cultures living underground. So that could have been why Gobekli Tepe was buried, to protect it from these coronal mass ejections that they knew were going to happen. According to Sumerian texts, there are some very interesting tales. And I have a picture for you of a slab of mud that has had a little, what you call what do they call these? I'm having a senior moment, Jim. These are small little carved stone figurines that have a relief sculpture carved into them. And they are rolled into wet clay.
Rolled into that wet clay, yeah.
These were used as pictorial images or seals during the Sumerian culture. And most people who had a position of power, if they were an attorney or they were a priest or they were a mason or they were, they worked in farms, or they had some type of special skill, they were a priest, they would have a unique icon for themselves that was carved in stone like this. So these are called cylinder seals. Thank you. Here now it comes to me. Obviously they're cylinders, and they're also seals when you roll them. And these would be used to seal documents. Now there are tons of cuneiform documents which talk about a whole human history, which we tend to look at as mythological. We don't accept it as real because it predates the time we have known. But according to some of the texts that exist, there is one text called the Cattle and Grain text. And interestingly enough, I bring this to the attention of my audience when I speak. We can trace our cereal grains that we use today as being cultivated and grown in this area of Turkey. So the same, like wheat and barley and millet and things like that we grow today, we can find first were cultivated in this area. And an ancient cattle and grain texts talk about an area in this region of the world between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, what's considered the top of the Fertile Crescent, or the Garden of Eden, right, from the Bible.
Right.
That two beings, Ash and Lashtar, I think their names are, they descend from a heavenly abode called the Duku, and they bring to humanity the knowledge of cultivation of grains, domestication of animals, writing, the making of pottery. They bring civilizing characteristics to human culture. and we trace the beginning of our grains. Like we can date when grains began. There's a genetic lineage to them, and we can date them like we can ourselves. And the dating of grain goes back 12,000 years to this area of the world.
You know, a lot of this comes together when you give this some thought, when you give anything some thought as to where it started. Where did farming start? Where did the grain, eating of grains, where did cultivating fields and things like that?
And of course, grains can be fermented into wine.
Exactly.
So that's huge.
I know. When you look at these stone carvings, okay, yes, Gobeckli Tepe was 12,000 years old, but look at the carving, okay? Yeah. That didn't just happen yesterday. Those people that carved those stones had to learn a trade.
Oh, sure. Those things could have been erected and carved, 20,000 years ago and only buried 10,000 years.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Whoever it was that had the skill and the knowledge and the trade to carve into stone like that, it wasn't something that they had just learned. It was something that was passed on to them, just like anything else in this world.
Some people thought that this whole hill at Gobeckli was a school. And, people built something, and then they buried it and built the next one. And it was a training ground.
Well,
some people thought a training ground for Masons. Yeah.
But this has been an interesting conversation.
It's absolutely fascinating. And I love jumping down rabbit holes like this because it makes us a little more humble, right? About our lives in the current world we live in. Exactly. When there's so much desire to, destroy or change the history or the past. And yet we can learn so much about our human culture and our earth by just being curious enough to explore it and figure out what it means and be willing to put pieces of the puzzle together from other cultures that could match up. Right. And of course, there's more and more pieces of Gobeckli which continue to overlap into other civilizations and cultures around the world. Not only all these Buddhas and figurines and sculptures, from Tiwanaku to Easter Island to, all over the Far East as well, they exist. But other pieces of history, like having an astronomical alignment to some sort of, astrological perspective that changes with precession over time.
Right.
That's a clue, and we must begin to appreciate and look at that. So, I encourage more people to take the journey, take the deep dive, because it's so fascinating and so interesting.
So, Jennifer, this was fascinating conversation. Where do you go from here? Now you're going to give a talk, Phoenix MUFON.
Right. I'm also speaking at the McMinnville conference this year, which is in Oregon.
McMinnville.
I'll be speaking on crop circles up there and the geologic research I've done into that, which kind of overlaps a little bit into earthquake theory and underground aqueducts and new understandings about the nature of water and how it holds and stores electromagnetic charge and how reactive electromagnetic charge is and how that could possibly be relating to what's going on inside the formations of crop circles and whether it ties in with consciousness or not. So I take a deep dive on that as well.
Good.
I'm also speaking on a cruise coming up in...
Oh, are you really? Okay.
Yes, I've been asked to speak on a cruise that leaves out of San Pedro, and it's with a Royal Caribbean, and the name of the archaeological group that's going on this is called Hidden Secrets. So there's a lot of great speakers on there. Adam Apollo will be there, Scott Walters, a couple of other friends, Bob Terrio, who's been a co-producer with me. He'll be on that cruise, sharing some research we've been doing on ancient artifacts that have come out of Mexico, which are quite fascinating. So that should be great. And I think that's all I know about right now, but like every 4 months or so, I get asked to speak somewhere. So it's quite interesting. I'm very happy to share what I know, and I'm happy to do other shows and help other researchers in any way I can.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on my program, Dark Window. Are you going to do any more research on Gobeckli Tepe? Are you
Well, I actually constantly do, and I get fed new information. In fact, a whole new site's been discovered nearby and uncovered. Actually, it's been uncovered since '96. It's called Karahan. I think it's called Karahan, and
Really?
it's got interesting human figurines. It's got statues inside of it, and circles and pillars, and there's more actual snakes and things like that that come in. It's kind of even more dramatic, I think, than Gobekli Tepe. So there's a whole lot more that's being uncovered constantly. Even though they're not doing work right now at Gobeckli, there are other sites that are being uncovered. And I
So
think that's going to shed more light.
one last question.
Yeah.
Gobekli Tepe, what does that actually mean?
Oh, well, Gobeckli sort of means pot belly, and Tepe means hill. So the hill looks like a big pot belly.
Okay.
So that's why they named it Gobeckli. It's hard to say in English, but
It's
once you get it under your tongue, it's fine. I hear people like stumble on it, like
so yeah, right. So are they
what
still
is it
digging?
called?
Are they still digging and unearthing
In
this same
yes,
site?
in other sites nearby. And I think there might be starting to do the adjacent side of the hill, but what has been uncovered now is now roofed over. So those aerial shots I showed you, you can't get them anymore. The whole thing is encased over a dome,
Okay.
and it's protected with armed guards. And I'm not quite sure how much ongoing uncovering is happening, but I know they've just built a whole new museum. They've expanded the existing museum that's in San Lerfa by 10 times, and they've created recreations of what Gobekli Tepe looks like, or what they think it all looks like. So much has changed since I've been there.
Well, thank you for this very enlightening presentation. And this is just a sort of a preview of what you're going to deliver at Phoenix MUFON.
Right.
So thank you again. And we're up out of time. And so on behalf of Jennifer Stein, myself, and Patricia Wilkinson, thank you for joining us, and come see us again next week where we have another guest. But thank you, Jennifer, and good night.
Good night.